Hello and welcome to the GoodPractice Podcast, a weekly show about work, performance and learning. I'm Dickie, and this week we're talking about attention spans. Or at least we will be unless we get distracted by any shiny objects along the way.
Ba-doom.
It's been one of those days. I'm joined as usual by Owen Ferguson. Hello, Owen.
Hello, Ross.
Along with guest Jonathan Marshall, who is Head of Learning at the UK's Diplomatic Academy. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello. Great to be here.
So, Jonathan, I'll start with you. The received wisdom is that in the information era where we have so many things vying for our attention, our ability to focus on one task for any amount of time is gradually diminishing. But what does the evidence tell us? What do we actually know about attention spans?
I think the first thing is to talk about what we don't know and just be honest about it. And there's a lot of spurious, you might disagree, but spurious headlines out there about diminishing attention spans, which sort of get increasingly ridiculous. And when you look into the sources, they don't really stand up. So, claims about species-based attention spans for goldfish, humans, and maybe they've covered others, but those seem to be the two main species that people focus on. There was a whole set of headlines a few years ago, and I'm sure it's still bouncing around the internet around, oh my God, we've now got 8 seconds of attention span left. And this is now
goldfish
less.
Get a hard time.
Yeah, and that's no less than goldfish. When you look into it, there was a Microsoft Canada study, and it's absolutely got nothing to do with that headline. They quoted a few things which people have tried to track down, don't seem to exist. So there's some really great debunking articles if you sort of look for Microsoft Canada, 8 seconds, goldfish, etc. But I imagine, and you maybe have seen more of this than I have, but micro-learning adverts and sort of latest trends in the industry, people tend to cite this kind of research to ironically grab attention and sell their wares. So I think being very suspicious about any numbers is a starting point, because I haven't seen any convincing evidence that it's 8 seconds, 1 hour, 8 hours, 15 minutes or any of the above.
Yeah, this is like one of those classic examples of trying to distill a complicated and nebulous topic like attention into a pithy statistic that can be easily regurgitated. So there's, the myth that human attention spans have changed are now, shorter than the attention span of a goldfish. To your point, Jonathan, it seems it's almost like the perfect meme. It's almost as if it's been created to be replicated and tweeted. And so it's this simple concept that spreads really quickly. But, I think the thing that disappoints me about how pervasive that is that even a little bit of critical thought causes it to fall down. Because the minute you start thinking, well, what exactly is meant by attention in that case? When you try and define what it is, it gets really messy really quickly. Is it about where our eyes are focused, or, what if we're listening to something? Is it about what we're thinking about from moment to moment? How would you even go about measuring that stuff? So there's this core tenet of science, which is if you can find an exception to a particular claim, then it immediately means that claim isn't generally applicable. And you have to start stating under what conditions that claim holds true. So, if I go to the cinema and my attention is held by a film for more than 2 hours, or I can binge watch a program on Netflix without using my phone in between or getting up to get food, then
or clean yourself.
Yeah, or clean myself or sleep. That claim that our attention span is 8 seconds, it just falls apart. It's not true for all people in all contexts, if indeed it's true for any context. So, attention.
It's very interesting to look at how much money Hollywood or Bollywood or anybody else will throw into keeping your attention for those 2 hours. And I think that's another interesting line of inquiry. If it takes that much effort and that much star power and that many special effects to actually get you through that couple of hours, and we've probably all drifted off in the middle of a film, even so. I do wonder if some of the things we do in L&D are a bit underpowered, and we're perhaps not trying as not that we have Bollywood budgets, but. We should maybe try a bit harder.
Yeah, well, that is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, to what extent do people compare stuff that's produced by their organisation against stuff that they can see externally, and does that impact on people's attention? There's there's lots of interesting areas to examine when it comes to people's attention.
Because the headline numbers, they don't, as you were saying they don't really take into account what it is you're paying attention to. So if you're watching a show on Netflix versus completing a piece of compliance e-learning, for example, you're sort of not necessarily measuring like with like. And I think it is pervasive, though. I think, we certainly aware of conversations that we've had even in our team about, sort of a video length, sort of ideal video length. And I think this is kind of generally held across the industry, is that, there's a certain, you don't want to have videos that are too long because people will eventually tune out. And yet in different contexts, people are quite willing to sit down and watch a video for, an hour, or even watch sort of multiple videos back to back. And so, I wonder, it's sort of understandable in a way because video is a passive medium, and but I think part of it is just we're sort of terrified of people disengaging for even a second.
Well, you could lose people.
Yeah.
And videos are passive unless you're shouting at it.
Right.
Which probably
or you've got like interactive video or something.
Yeah. Well, just shouting is fine. And, equally with a podcast. So, by now, however many minutes we are into this podcast, you'll have lost some people. Others may be shouting at it. And that is behaviour to be encouraged because that's engagement and will keep up attention. But some of the technique, I think some of the, there are cross-cutting techniques of how to keep people's attention over a period of time, and whether you've got the massive budget and the special effects, or whether you're just doing a bit of handheld, video on a phone internally. Things like stories, emotion, sort of authenticity, any sort of colour, music, song, dance, it's getting a bit extreme. But these techniques sort of work at the micro level, and you can equally do it with a phone as you can in a studio. Yeah,
you mentioned, essentially we quite often come back to the topic of emotion on this podcast. So I think also the relevance of the material has a significant impact. So if someone feels something is relevant to them, or it meets an immediate need, then you don't actually have to do that much to get their attention. They're already invested in it. It's those circumstances where that's not the case. There's not that immediate need that's there, where you have to work harder and think about, right, okay, what techniques or methods or tools can I use to attract someone's attention and convince them that it is worth their time?
Yeah. And I think the relevance part actually brings you straight back to the neuroscience of this. Zero claims to be neuroscience or know anything about it beyond things I've read on the internet. But sort of looking into this, there does seem to be, there's no consensus about numbers on attention spans at this higher level, but there is quite a bit of good hard evidence around some of the underlying sort of issues that are relevant to attention. I think the scanning system of the brain is one of them, and they're sort of developing research in the last 20, 30 years that really suggests our sort of brain is like an air traffic control tower. And it has these sort of three distinct systems, or maybe it's four, but, one is the radar, continually scanning. And if you're relevant, if you're talking, if you're covering something which is relevant, then you'll instantly be picked up. So you've got the radar, which is always on. You've got the scanning system, which is always scanning 24/7. And then you've got when the scanning system picks up something interesting, relevant, exciting, worrying, the beep goes off and the air traffic controller comes across. That's the third system to sort of make a decision about it, the executive network. So you've got these three systems, and I think it sort of brings home how hard it is to stay focused on something when there are so many other distractions. And perhaps that's where the modern world does differ a bit. There are, our menu of choices and our sort of ways to distract ourselves, perhaps higher with technology and so on, and just living in a sort of busy society. But it's that continually scanning is brilliant for picking up things that are relevant. Unfortunately, it's then 10 seconds later brilliant for picking up something else. So you're continually fighting off the other relevant things, because we're never going to be the single most relevant thing.
Yeah, that I think that's a really important point, because it's highly unlikely that human attention span is actually changing. What is changing is the environment that we're working in, and the point you make there, Jonathan, about distractions is probably a more useful area to focus in on, is that there are more of these potential distractions out there. And so, how do you help people to handle that? And how do you compete in a world where there are all these potential distractions?
And they're external distractions and they're internal distractions. So you can be, your phone is in your eye line. It can sort of beep and buzz and vibrate, and, it can remind you of things. But people chatting, any sort of noise, anything that sort of distracts us in general. But, intrinsically, our own emotions, thoughts, daydreaming sort of distract us as well. So then you've got that to compete with. And I think this is where stress comes into it. And there's I think there's been more examination of this in pedagogy and sort of in early years education, the role of stress, which is actually blocking and detracting from people's attention spans and ability to focus. So if you've got, stuff going on in your head, that literally stops you from focusing on what you're trying to achieve. So, all that competition and, again, I think a neuroscientist would call this directed attention fatigue. The way that you do over a period of time lose the ability to block out all this other stuff and focus on the thing that's most interesting or most relevant, or that you want to focus on, and you gradually get overwhelmed by all this other stuff. You're literally, your ability to block it out just deteriorates until your defenses are right down, and you're just exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, like while I'm skeptical of, as we've talked about, the sort of headline figures of attention span down to a particular number, I'm conscious that while we're recording this episode, I'm getting Slack notifications. I had a calendar notification just pop up, which, these are things I should have closed to reduce the chance of me becoming distracted while we're doing this. But yesterday, I was creating a ticket for our graphic design team. For every podcast episode we put out, we have accompanying graphics that go out on Twitter, different sort of social media channels on our website. And I had to be reminded this morning by one of our graphic design team to create the ticket, because twice I went on to the website to create the ticket and somehow got distracted by something else. And it was one of those days yesterday where I felt like I was very busy, but not necessarily achieving very much, because there was just sort of constant different things vying for my attention. And yeah, I mean, I guess my question off of that is, from a learning design perspective, if we're not necessarily designing learning interventions around this is how long somebody can concentrate on a piece of learning, how should we, if at all, incorporate or consider attention spans when we're designing learning solutions? I
think we've just got to accept we're in a fight. We're in a fight to catch and keep people's attention. We get sort of complacent about it, and we all do. And particularly if we're talking from the front of a room, or we're designing some very absorbing piece of content, which is fascinating to us, and, we spend hours over it. You sort of forget that you're in a sort of minute-to-minute fight to actually help people, to focus. I mean, maybe they don't want to focus on your stuff, in which case you're never going to win, but assuming they do, and you're on the same side here, we're all in a fight together, against this sort of deteriorating, attention span, which we sort of can't put minutes on. But I think it's best to, be pragmatic and err on the safe side. And there's this lovely quote from Jerry Seinfeld, who said, there is no such thing. I imagine him saying it in this kind of very regal sort of voice, there is no such thing as attention span. There is merely the quality of what one is viewing. It's like, okay, Jerry, thanks very much. But then you look at what Jerry Seinfeld did, and episodes of Seinfeld come in at 22 minutes. Yeah. He wasn't taking chances. There's the grand statement, and here's the pragmatic, reality of network television. So, and, TED Talks talk about 18 minutes, and I mean, you can't put the number on it, but play safe. So I think that's one principle. We're not as interesting as we think we are. We can't go on for as long as we think we can. People do start to switch off, tune out, and people come in and out. It's not a sort of an either or. People sort of fluctuate, and the evidence is lacking. What evidence there is suggests that people come in and out of the zone. They don't, you don't lose them once and for all. And there's some work on lectures which suggests that at the end of the lecture, as people do a bit of a summary and tell you, what to do next, the attention sort of rises again, but having been through a slump in the middle. So err on the safe side, and watch what Jerry Seinfeld does rather than what he says. It's got to be one of them. And, that means things like breaking stuff up into chunks, making sure people get breaks. I mean, it's easier when you've got a control over a sort of face-to-face situation. You can't have control over how people use, digital material, or indeed read books. Activity, getting people active as far as possible, and use all those things that attract attention, whether it's Bollywood or talking to your mates down the pub, and that's stories, emotion, relevance, and reward as well. So those are some of the things I think we need to do. Yeah,
and all those things need to they're part of the tool set that you've got, in order to both capture and retain someone's attention. You need to be thinking about these things. There's I think there's a couple of things that L&D people need to be thinking about. One is actually more like a subject domain. Like, how do you help people to focus in a world where there's lots of distractions available? So, what tools or techniques are there to help people focus better in situations? So, Ross, you mentioned that you haven't switched off your notifications, which is I
have now.
You have now.
He's reading a book. I can see him.
Yeah. So, can we find ways to make it easy for people to put those on pause? Or is there, are there things that we can do to raise awareness that that the capability exists and how to execute them? So there is stuff around there about helping people to focus attention. But then on the flip side of that is, for certain things, certain interventions that we want to put into place, we need to get people's attention in this distraction heavy environment. And, it is a battle, just as Jonathan says. And so you need to use the tools that are at your disposal to make that happen.
And are they paying attention, or are we buying it? I mean, that's the sort of mindset shift we have to, because we keep on saying pay attention as if it's the person who's trying to focus. It's all up to them to actually, and sure enough, you do pay because your stock of it diminishes as you go along. But, I think we have to just accept a bit more. We have to buy the attention, which has not come as a new idea to advertisers, for example, or, anybody in any industry, which is just desperately trying to grab people's attention. But perhaps in the slightly more sheltered world of L&D, not always, we just got to do a bit more of the buying. And some of that is around building activity into what would otherwise be more passive situations. And again, there's some research, some evidence that even a longer sort of lecture, you get 20 to 30% improvement in retention as tested afterwards if you just have a break, 3 breaks, even short breaks, to allow participants, people who are listening to the lecture, to compare notes, reflect, just have a couple of minutes chat. That seems to do. I mean, that's a sort of very low level, but fundamentally redesigning things so that people are, still with the guidance and still with the expert input that they need, actually able to be active, because then you keep distracting yourself back onto task. That's the truth. The distractions are going to happen. They've got to be our own distractions back onto the task. And that's the beauty of activity. We can probably all think of, times when we've spent hours absorbed in some activity, useful or otherwise. And we can also think of when we've just nodded off, very, very early on in something that should have interested us and did interest us. So, we've got the whole repertoire, but I think the design, we can help people to help themselves, if you like.
When you talk about buying attention, could you go into that a little bit more?
You want the price?
Does it have to be expensive though? Is that sort of creating more visually stimulating experiences? I'm just intrigued by the phrase and what you mean by it exactly.
I think definitely it's using, there is a toolkit of things, some better evidence than others, which do attract people's attention. I would put activity and relevance, as Owen says, right at the top of that. Visual definitely is one of them. And it's all stuff we can do through design. I had a recent experience of designing a massive open online course on MOOC. And in a couple of the weeks, we had lots of content I was very proud of, other people were very proud of. And of course, where was the spike of activity? It was around a discussion and around a question. I mean, damn, I spent 1 minute coming up with that question. It was a good question, but, as opposed to 3 hours doing this article over here, and what's the thing that gets all the attention? But, that's, so you need the blend, but you need to give people that chance to be active, I think. Also tell them to drink coffee. There's plenty of hard evidence that in moderation, caffeine does, address directed attention fatigue. Just not, not pro plus, not overnight, don't. But, 1 cup, it works.
I think you could say it's generally true that if you're working with the grain of people's interest, then it's less expensive.
Right.
And when people don't already have a degree of interest, if it's not something that addresses their concerns, then you have to work a lot harder to get that, because you almost have to convince them that this is something that they should have, that they should spend some of their attention on.
Yeah. I mean, if we're losing that battle, as we've framed it, is that just because we aren't always doing a good job of explaining to people why they should care about particular things? About why health and safety is more compelling than, I don't know, what's going on Instagram or whatever else it is that's distracting them.
Yeah, I mean, it's if someone's not interested in health and safety, it's either actually not relevant to them, or it might be that they don't have any experience of the implications of not following certain procedures or rules or what have you. So capturing their interest, that you almost need to have some kind of visceral hook in that situation. I think Ross Garner always talks about, fire safety. The best way of making sure that people are aware that it is important is to, set the office on fire. That's extreme, but can you find ways of highlighting, of engaging with them in an emotional way that gets them to switch their attention onto, right, okay, this is something that I now care about because I am terrified of getting burnt alive.
I think there's one other thing where L&D can help in terms of design, and that's rejecting this idea. We're moving away from this idea that 1 hour is a standard unit. This always irritates me, and it, at some point I even looked up, why is an hour 60 minutes, and it goes back to Babylon and Egypt and sort of the mathematics of the ancient civilizations. But in essence, it's a portion size problem. Because we think that 1 is 60 minutes, 1 hour, then we, have a tendency, maybe this is less true than it used to be, but there's still a tendency, whether it's workshops, masterclasses, lectures, talks, to think of 1 hour as a basic unit of learning. And we say 50 minutes and then 10 minutes for Q&A, and the 10 minutes get squeezed. And, I have actually sat next to a government minister who said, I'm just going to chat for 5 minutes and then we should take questions. It's more interesting. And then talk for 45 minutes non-stop. This was years ago. But if we can get away from that 1 hour standard, I think that would also help, because, once you set that up as 1, then you sort of fill it. It would be much easier. There's an accident of history here. If we'd gone down I think it was the Sinhalese way of calculating hours, we'd have had 60 hours of 24 minutes in a day rather than 24 hours of 60 minutes. So we should go Sinhalese and have 24-minute hours, and that would be much more closer to Jerry Seinfeld and TED Talks and other things. So there's something there about that consumption norm or portion size issue. There we are. That's me being nerdy.
No, but you're right. I mean, it is interesting how you're driven by the attachment to whole numbers or things that make sense like that. So I'm with you on the hour thing. I tend to try and not booking things in for like hour or half hour slots. Sometimes I end up doing it, but I'm equally likely to book in sort of something for 20 minutes or 45 minutes. But for whatever reason, and even though I know this, like I would never book something in for 24 minutes. It just.
How did you pick 38 minutes for the podcast, if that's what it is?
It's
supposed to be 30. It just never ends up at that.
Oh, I see.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we kind of.
It's a half that overflows.
Exactly. If we aim for 30, then we'll probably end
usually
up.
it's up about 38. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's that thing as well with like booking meetings where if you give yourself an hour, they've done studies on this. That's how long you will take to do the task. Where actually all you needed was 24 minutes.
The thing about attention spans is that, as we discussed, the evidence is patchy, and you can't always sort of grip what the overall answer is. Although there are some elements that are better evidenced. I think this is in contrast to another big issue in L&D, which is repetition, where there's such a stronger evidence base, and a lot of it is in the book Make It Stick. For people who know that, and if people who don't know that, I'm not saying it's the greatest read ever, but it contains a huge amount of the evidence around spaced and varied practice, retrieval practice. Again, something that we're not always great at designing into learning programs, and it's not always part of the vendor model, and it's not an efficient way of selling things, sort of stacked high and one-offs. But by way of a contrast, I think the value of repetition, retrieval, spaced and varied practice is a well-evidenced bit of L&D. So I wouldn't claim that attention spans have quite got to that level of research and had that much investment in them, and isn't quite as convincing as that that set of insights.
Yeah, it is amazing how you build up systems to help you repeat something until it becomes part of your muscle memory, or until you can retrieve it without any effort whatsoever. So I quite often I'm always looking for efficient ways of doing things on my computer. And so, things like, for example, I use a Mac. So if I do Command Shift 4, that's how I bring up the ability to take a screenshot of a particular application. And I'm astonished at how often I seem to take screenshots of things, but I do. But the way so first of all, I had to look that up. But looking it up is a pain, even on Google, even though Google's fast, looking, typing in the thing and then bring it up, etc. So I ended up putting the command onto a post-it note, put it onto, on my desktop, until the point where I had done it often enough that I don't have to think about it anymore. I know, it's almost like my fingers know that's the pattern to make, and I can do it. And so I think some of the challenge that you got in L&D is that repetition does lead to more efficiency, especially in terms of recalling stuff. How do you help people with that repetition process? What kind of prompts, what kind of resources, what kind of job aids can you provide until they become unnecessary?
And that's got to be a separate podcast, I presume, or a repetition of a previous podcast.
Okay, so we'll move on now to our regular feature, What I Learned This Week, where we share something we picked up in the past 7 days. Owen, do you want to get us started?
Sure. This week, I returned to growth mindset. So regular listeners may remember this was a subject of a previous What I Learned This Week from me. And I shared an overview of some studies that cast serious doubt about the how effective growth mindset interventions were. And it highlighted also the relatively narrow scope of the published research into trying to get any kind of effect from growth mindset initiatives, things that were supposed to improve or change people's mindset. But this week there is a big new study in Nature that involves Angela Duckworth and Carol Dweck, who've been involved in the original grit and growth mindset research. And the study shows some positive, albeit still somewhat small effects from a relatively short online intervention. And on a first read, it only came out 2 or 3 days ago. It appears to be a really robust piece of research. It's a large study. It involves about 12,000 students. And so we can have some confidence, and it's well designed, as you might expect. They're very respectable researchers. So we can have some confidence that the effects are real, but it also highlights, I think, it also highlights under what conditions those effects can take place. So it's not a case that growth mindset is like a simple thing and you can change it under all circumstances. There are particular conditions that have to exist in order for a change to occur. But what's most interesting about the growth mindset stuff for me is it's about the journey that it's going through, and it's almost exactly, well, it's not almost, it is exactly how science is supposed to work. There, you've got this interesting positive finding from a relatively small research base, and then it fails to replicate under some conditions. So there's skepticism that emerges about whether it's actually a thing or not. And then there's further research that uncovers, oh, actually it does work under these conditions and there are positive effects. And maybe it is worth spending a bit more time looking at this stuff. Just to be clear, the science is not in any way settled on this growth mindset stuff, and especially for adults in a work context. So in general, we're very much better off waiting until we get some better results and clearer guidance before going off and spending a lot of time and money on trying to turn it into a thing. But it was it nudged it in the more positive direction, this study in Nature.
Excellent. We'll post a link to that in our show notes. Jonathan, what did you learn this week?
Well, coming down a level or two, I read a really nice article by Yasha Munk, and thanks to whoever retweeted it in my timeline, from The Atlantic, and it was how not to run a panel. And it had some rather good advice, and a little bit of a rant as well about how not to run a panel and the horrors we commit in conferences. But the four things stood out, his recommendations. Introductions, max 20 seconds. That's it, per person. No introductions of people introducing either. That's it. 20 seconds for the main people and out. No more than 4 people. I'm sure you would have pointed out gender diversity. No opening statements. I love this one. Just go straight into the questions. Because his point was, the first person will talk for 5 minutes if they've been told to talk for 3. The next person will talk for 7 minutes, the next for 10. And then you've got no time for questions. And this actually comes back to engaging people's attention as well. So no opening statements. And no questions longer than 20 seconds or mic cut off. So I quite liked Yasha Monk's rules for better panels.
Oh, it kind of fits into the attention span stuff. If a question lasts for longer than 20 seconds, people start to drift off.
Yeah, or get increasingly annoyed.
So my what I learned this week, I was quite pleased when I discovered this website called userinyourface.com, which I thought I'd discovered, and I thought this is the perfect thing for what I learned this week. Told Ross Garner about it, and he was like, oh yeah, Owen posted a link to that in Slack a few weeks ago, which I was unaware of. But basically, if you've ever wondered what UI is, userinyourface.com will give you a good idea. So basically it is a website which has intentionally been frustratingly designed. It's kind of like a test to see if you can navigate your way through this this form where everything has been purposely designed unintuitively. And it is very frustrating, and I think is a perfect example of why UI design is important.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it's you need to fill out a form or something, and and actually you get timed for how long it takes you to fill it out.
Yeah, you get timed, and then there's all these sort of annoying pop-ups that come up, and then they'll say click here, and there'll be a button. I don't want to give away too much because I'll sort of be giving people a cheat sheet of how to go through it, but it's worth doing, I think, and hopefully will not take up too much of your time. And that's all for this week. If you'd like to share your thoughts on the show, you can find us all on Twitter. Owen is
at Owen Ferguson.
Jonathan is
at LearningFCO.
And I'm at Robs_Dickie. You can also tweet at GoodPractice or at GoodPracticeAUS. To find out more about Good Practice, our performance support toolkit, bespoke e-learning and LMS, visit goodpractice.com. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.